I always like to tell this. His father's mother was a triplet. Her name was Nancy Jane Fitzpatrick. She married a Hutchinson. She had 10 sons, and she gave them all 3 names. And the third pregnancy, I guess it was, turned out to be twins. And she had selected the name Jacob Henry Joseph for the baby, if it were a boy. But when the second one showed up, they didn't have a name. So they named him, that's George's father, Denison Asbury Hurst, for the doctor who delivered him. So his initials were D.A.H. Hutchinson, and they called him Little Doc. And he went by the name Doc the rest of his life. He lived to be 80-some years old. He was the pioneer here. He proved the claim out here by carrying.
Now, what's your full name?
Alice Prather, Prather Hutchinson.
Okay, this is May 2nd, 1985. This is Joe Todd, an interview with Mrs. Alice Prather Hutchinson in Enid, Oklahoma. Ma'am, where were you born?
Where?
Yes, ma'am.
Hickman, Kentucky. March 6, 1900. It's easy to remember my age. You look at the calendar.
Who is your father?
Who is my father?
Yes, ma'am.
Thomas Alexander Prather.
And your mother?
Mary McDaniel Prather. You have to put that on nowadays.
Where were your parents from?
Kentucky.
Both of them?
Both of them.
What kind of work did your father do?
He had a land grant. He had several farms. One of them was a part of a land grant to his great-grandfather for services in the American Revolution.
What was his name?
Captain Basil Prather, B-A-S-I-L. And he won the war. I always say he won the war because he was on a special mission with 2 other companies to harass Burgoyne up around Saratoga, and they harassed him. And when the time for the big battle came, other divisions came in to help, and he, you remember, surrendered lock, stock, and everything he had, which was the first big victory of the Revolution. And then the French joined, so I claim he won the war. Had a part in it.
Yes, ma'am. Okay. As a little girl, what chores did you do around the house, around the farm?
I had the best excuse in the world. I began taking piano lessons when I was 5 years old. And when it was time to wash the dishes or do any chores, I had to practice. Practice piano.
Who's your piano teacher?
I had several. You want to know her name?
Yes, ma'am.
Carrie Burris, Miss Carrie Burris, B-U-R-R-U-S. I had lessons with her for, I guess, 7 or 8 years, and kept right on through college and earned a degree in piano. It was a diploma in music instead of a degree.
You know, were you raised on a farm?
Yes.
How large was it?
The home place had about 100 acres, but in all my father owned over 1,000 acres. There were 5 places, including, I think it was 70 acres that was part of the old land grant.
How large was the house?
Well, we had about 7 rooms, and I'm almost, war. I feel like sometimes I lived through all wars, but when the slaves were freed, most of them in our neighborhood stayed with their former owners and worked the land. And they were paid wages, And we knew them, and they helped with everything. So we had a lot of good help around.
Did you know some of the former slaves?
Yes, I did.
What stories they tell you about the slave days?
I don't remember that. I don't remember what they said, except they felt like they were members of our family. I remember meeting one that I hadn't ever seen before, and she says, "Bless God, child, you look just like your pappy." She hugged me.
What was her name?
Matilda Prather. Her name was Tildy. We called her Tildy.
Mm-hmm. How many slaves did your family own?
Well, my own grandfather had, I don't really know, but I have the original bills of sale for 10 that he bought, and they're very interesting. For instance, one girl had on the bill of sale, Nellie. This was $1,000 for Nellie, and her future increase. That meant any children she had would go along with her.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know Nellie.
Mm-hmm. Tell me about your family and the Civil War. What happened?
Well, of course, my father was the second son. He had 7 sons. The oldest son was in high school, was a senior in high school, and every boy in the senior class left before graduation and joined the army when war was declared. And my father was the second son, and we lived down in Fulton County, which was newer, you know. And he came back at the end of his second year in high school, and they were recruiting a company to serve General Nathan Bedford Forrest personally. He was the most colorful and beloved, I believe, general in the Confederate Army. He was the one, you know, that Robert E. Lee said even was his estimate of one of the best. Well, where was I? I've forgotten. Anyway, he was 18 years old. He was 17 years old, and he served with him till the end of the war, and knew him personally, took his orders from him and reported to him. One of his jobs was to go down and sit on the riverbank and count the Yankee gunboats coming down. But he went on various missions. He knew General Forrest's family very well, his mother and his brothers. One time, my father and another one of the scouts rode as an armed escort for the general's mother on a 50-mile buggy trip in the buggy. She was a tall, dominant, not-type person, and it was said of her that when the general got mad, which he did at times, she was the only person who could calm him down. We all felt like we knew General Forrest, although, of course, he died before I was born.
What did your father, besides serving General Forrest, what did he say about the Civil War? What he did?
He was never bitter about the Civil War. He never regretted anything. He said the only thing he would have changed was that they should have been paid for the slaves. And it shouldn't have been fought in the first place, the whole war. But he had many friends on both sides, and he died on his 94th birthday, perfectly lucid, aware, up till the last minute almost of his life. The calm, serene, beautiful old man with the white hair and little white beard, just a typical old Southern gentleman. Wonderful.
How did the Reconstruction days affect the family and the farm?
Well, they just went to work and did the best they could. As I said, most of the neighbors that they had in our neighborhood just stayed there and worked the same land. even took the family names.
What about the carpetbaggers? Having trouble with them?
Not really. I don't recall anything that was said particularly about it. I can tell you about one out here. You want me to tell all this?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Estel out of Cary, Oklahoma, a good friend of ours. His son, George Estel, is my husband's age and a special friend. Well, here in Garfield County, he was almost, out there in that district, he was almost the only Confederate veteran around there. And one day, he went to vote, and they challenged his vote because he had been on the other side. And it made him so mad. They had a new baby daughter about that time. He went home and he named the child for 3 Confederate generals. The name was Zolly Lee. What's the other one? Zolly Carfer Lee and something else. Generals. Zolly Estel called all alive.
What was his name, that old veteran?
John Estel.
John Estel.
A carrier.
Tell me what you remember about the town of Hickman from your childhood.
The kind of one?
Hickman, is that where you're born?
Yes.
Tell me about that.
Well, it was just a sleepy little old river town, and we lived 3 or 4 miles out from town. And lots of kinfolks. Everybody had a lot of children in those days. My mother's family also. My father, one of 7 boys, and my mother was one of 10 children. And her family, the McDaniels, had come originally from Mississippi, Natchez, Mississippi. Her grandfather's buried at Natchez, Mississippi. And her great-great-grandmother, I love to tell this. It's one of my favorite stories. Her name was Ann Johnston. And family tradition says that she danced with Lafayette. And he said she was the prettiest girl he saw in America. I like that story.
Yeah.
Another story I like to tell about the McDaniels is, they were right down there on the river, and Grandfather McDaniel lived nearby during the time that Davy Crockett was in Congress. And when he'd come home, he'd come down the river, Ohio River and then the Mississippi River, and get off at Hickman, Kentucky, which at that time was called Mills Point. And he would walk out to my grandfather's house, my great-grandfather's house, and always eat supper. And if it were a light night, he'd walk on home, to his home in Alamo, Tennessee. And some of my uncles that I really remembered when he would bring his gun, or the one that was presented to him, old Betsy, and let them hold it in their hands and look at it. My hobby, I guess you'd say, is genealogy, and I have recorded a lot of these stories. Most of it is word of mouth. It isn't in print. But Davy Crockett wrote his own autobiography, which has a lot of misspelled words in it. And he says, I stayed all night with my friend McDaniel, and we went bear hunting down on the lake. We loved finding that in it. Davy Crockett.
How long did you live in Kentucky?
How long?
Yes, ma'am.
I was born in 1900, and I was married in 1923. I'd make it 23 years. But I was away in school for 4 years before I was married.
Where did you go to school?
I went to first 2 years of college at Milligan College, Johnson City, Tennessee. And my sister and I came out to Phillips University as juniors in 1919. And George, my husband, my late husband, claimed that he saw me the day we both were enrolling. I didn't see him. I didn't pay any attention to him, I guess. Anyway, we met at Phillips University.
Why did you come to school with Phillips?
Because my mother was a devoted member of the Christian church, and Milligan College was also a Christian church school, and we knew 3 personally of the professors at Phillips. Harry D. Smith, H. Clay Smith, and the Roberts family, Dr. D.D. Roberts and T.T. Roberts. T.T. was with Phillips, and Dr. Roberts was a medical doctor who graduated at the same medical school that 2 of my brothers. In our immediate family, there are 11 doctors in 4 generations. And my father was born in Louisville, and most of the doctors, of all 11 of them, went to Louisville, to the medical school there. But that's quite a record. 11 doctors, 2 of my brothers, 3 uncles, a bunch of cousins, nephews.
When did you start school?
At a rural school not far from my house, where my father had gone to school and my mother had gone to school.
What was the name of it?
Sylvan Shade.
How
Isn't
large?
that a pretty name?
Yes. How large was the school?
Well, we had 8 grades up until about 1912. They added a high school, made it a county high school. And I was a member of the first graduating class in 1917. I graduated from high school. And they were, in our family, 7 children, all of us went there.
When it was just the 8 grades, how many rooms did you have in that?
Oh, 1.
How did one teacher teach 8 grades?
Well, they just had to be smart and manage them. One of my teachers, I remember particularly, after he had taught that school, went on to law school and became a very prominent Kentucky district judge. Lived a long time, and incidentally married a cousin of mine who is nationally known. His name is Elvis Starr. He's a New York lawyer now, but he was Secretary of the Army under Jack Kennedy. Pretty well-known guy, he's still up there. Both sides of the family had some interesting characters, and some that we don't tell about.
What did you do during World War I?
I was in school at Milligan.
Did you have any organized efforts to support the war effort at Milligan?
Yes, we had an SATC. And when the war started, the girls in the dormitory had to go by their time schedule. We got up to reveille and went to bed at taps, just like the boys did.
How big is Milligan at that
Milligan
time?
at that time, I've forgotten the number. It was 400 or 500 people. And it was, in the suburbs, really, of Johnson City, Tennessee. Near enough that we could just go in and out a lot.
Who was head of the school?
Dr. H.J. Durthick. He and his wife were very talented, friendly, ideal president and his wife. We loved them.
Did you stay on campus or did you board
I stayed on campus in the dormitory. It's the first time I'd ever been away from home, really. It was fun.
How big was the dormitory? How big was the dormitory?
Oh, it was a nice big one. I don't know how many people were
Did
in
you take your meals at the dormitory?
Yes, we lived there.
What did you study there? What was your curriculum?
Mainly of music. In fact, I got that diploma in piano while I was at Milligan. And then I had to go to a summer school to finish, get my degree in 2 more years out here at Phillips. I didn't mind staying over because by that time I was interested in George. So when I stayed for summer school, that was good.
Yeah.
And we didn't, we were engaged, but we didn't marry. We didn't get married until he finished and had a job as a coach at Longfellow Junior High School.
Now, besides SATC, what does SATC stand for?
Student Army Training Corps.
What else did you do to support the war effort at Milligan?
Oh, we sold war bonds and bought them, made speeches and talked about it. We were very patriotic.
Did you have Chautauqua at Milligan?
Chautauqua?
Yes, ma'am.
I don't think so. I don't really know. I don't remember in Chautauqua.
Okay. Armistice Day.
Oh, I'll never forget it. I had been home. I'd had flu. That year was a bad flu year, and apparently caught it on the way up to Milligan. It was a long trip on the train, an overnight trip on the train. And the President Durfee, happened to be down in our area and was going back on the 11th of November. So he said, why don't you come go when I go? And there was another girl who had been home too on leave. So we got on the train that afternoon, and our change was in Nashville, Tennessee, where we waited a couple of hours for our next, we had an overnight berth, Pullman car. And Dr. Durfee took us downtown to see all the parades and all the hula and the excitement.
Tell me about the parades. What is that downtown
Just
Nashville?
a motley outfit, everybody just going up and down, shouting, carrying banners. There were a few military around who took part in it. But mostly it was, they shot off a lot of guns, I remember that. They probably were blanks, but anyway, we were with Dr. Durfee. We enjoyed it all. They didn't shoot us.
How long did you stay in Nashville?
I think 2 or 3 hours. I don't remember the exact time. And then we got to Milligan about noon the next day.
Tell me about the flu epidemic.
Oh, it was terrible. We had, I think it was 3 deaths there at the school. Mrs. Durfee took me to her house first, and nobody knew what was the matter with me. And then it was so bad, I had such high fever, they took me to the hospital, and I remember that the main medication was quinine. They gave me massive doses of quinine, and it makes you totally deaf. I couldn't hear a thing. And when they finally quit giving it to me, I was just amazed at all the noise that came up around that hospital. I hadn't been hearing anything. But I survived it and got over it.
How big was Phillips when you first came here?
Oh, that I don't remember either. It's probably on record all around here somewhere.
And did you stay on campus?
But yeah, I stayed at the dormitory, Athenium Hall. It was right down there by the Marshall Building, long before the Marshall Building was there.
It's still there?
No. They built a new one, play hall over there on the, past the lake.
How many students stayed in the dormitory?
I don't remember. My sister and I roomed together, and another girl who had been at Milligan, and her sister and brother. There were 5 of us came out from Milligan. So we really felt much at home. We could get along fine, and did get along fine.
What was your curriculum here?
The standard credits I would need for a diploma or an AD. I remember very well that when I graduated, when Dr. Ryder, Professor Ryder, was evaluating my credits, he said to me, Alice, you have enough credits for a life certificate in teaching. I said, oh, I don't care about that. I don't think I'll ever teach school. He said, you don't know what you'll do before you die. I'm going to get it for you anyway. And sure enough, I had taught 24 years altogether. And it was a life certificate, grades 1 to 12. And I taught all of them, including, I was principal the last 14 years that I taught.
What did the town of Enid look like in 1919?
Well, it was a square, beautiful square, and at the end of it was Phillips, out here with the bell tower. It was a beautiful town, but this was pretty far from downtown.
Who were some of the prominent people at that time?
Well, I happen to know a good many of them because they came out to school. And after I was married, it was a great advantage to me to have known them. For instance, I was a member of DAR in Kentucky before I was married, but our chapter here was limited to 30 members, and they met in their homes, and they accepted me, which I considered an honor, because they were people like Mrs. Marshall. Her husband was the dean of the Bible College, Dean Marshall. Mrs. McCash, whose husband was the president of Phillips. And in fact, I have known all but two of the presidents of DAR since it was inaugurated, started here in 1913. I'm an old settler now. I knew them all.
Tell me about Dr. McCash.
Dr. McCash was the most gentleman I think I have ever known. He was friendly, he was dignified, he knew his business, and we loved him. And his wife and his daughter, Allegra Ruth, was in my class. She was a special friend, and they had a car, an old, I think it was a Huckmobile or something like that, and we called Allegra Ruth Speedy because she drove the car. Her father didn't even drive. And when we were dating, Allegra Ruth was dating Dr. Harry D. Smith's son, Christy, and I was dating George Hutchinson, and my sister was dating Lloyd Spencer, who's still here in town. And Speedy could get the car, and we went to all the games, and we went everything. We still called her Speedy as long as she lived. She died a couple of years ago.
When did you see your first automobile?
When?
Yes, ma'am.
I cannot tell you that. I think one of the very earliest memories of really riding on an automobile was in 1909. You won't believe this, but it's the truth. President Taft came up the Mississippi on a boat, on a warship, I guess it was. Everybody was amazed the thing could get up there. It was a great big thing. And one of his stops was at Hickman, Kentucky. And one of our friends had a new car, and we got to ride around with him and see everything. And President Taft was just enormous. He was the biggest man I think I ever saw. He not only was tall, I bet he weighed 400 pounds. That's a very clear memory to me. I remember the man who had the car and drove us around, and who was with me and all that.
What was his name?
The man who took us around, Tyler Beale. Tyler Beale. The Tyler family was a very prominent family there. The son of who could afford one. So, of course, we all liked him and his car.
Now, next question. Were there many flappers here in Enid?
Many what?
Flappers in the 20s?
Oh, we were all flappers, I think. I didn't know anybody wasn't a flapper.
Now, what is a good definition of a flapper?
I don't know. A girl likes to have a good time, I guess. Wore short dresses. I know we wore pretty short dresses sometimes.
And where does the term originate? The term flapper?
I have no idea.
I've never found anyone who knows what the term flapper is.
Maybe they went so fast their skirts flapped. You haven't asked me about the football game yet.
Okay.
Football team.
Tell me about the football team.
Okay. That was 1919. The football team was the famous Phillips Iron Men. They won, and for the season total, 434 points, I believe it was, to their opponents' 14. They beat the University of Texas. Most of them, including George, were veterans. They had been through World War I. They were pretty big and tough, you know. And there were 18 men on the squad. I have a picture of them, of all 18 of them. And they carried 18 with them on their team, that was it. Now, how many do they carry for a game, a football team? Well, football, for the 4 years that George was here, was very prominent. And then it ended, Phillips ended the football program completely. I believe it was 1932, wasn't it? Something like that.
Why did they stop football?
They couldn't afford it. He had a football scholarship, which gave him room, board, and tuition. And most of them did. But they earned it. If they weren't out practicing, they dug post holes and things like that. Anything that they had to do to pay part of their expenses. But they were a prominent bunch. There were only 2 left living of their 18. Well, Doug Robick, for one. He came down here from Michigan. He was the star, the big star. Later, he was an All-American, and he was the president of the Olympics one year, not very long ago. And the other one was Dutch Richardson. He's an Enid person, but he's still living, so far as I know, in Oklahoma City. And the 4 that were still living, it was about 8 years ago they had their last reunion, including George, my husband, and Fred Lawrence from up here at Mayfield, Kansas. But we think almost. They were glad to get back, and the girls were glad to see them.
And you got married?
1923, at my old Kentucky home, which was a real one. My mother and father lived together there 57 years. 7 children were born there. 5 funerals were held there, and our wedding. And we had a Model T sedan, which we drove back to Enid. That was our honeymoon trip. It was a flood year, and we ferried 5 times.
What month did you get married?
June 16.
June 16. A June bride.
A June bride.
How big was the wedding?
I think we had about 20 people at the house. It was at my home. And we left at 8 o'clock in the morning, and before noon we'd gotten stuck in the mud and had to be pulled out by mules. We managed to get as far as Dyersburg. We had planned to go to Memphis, but after getting stuck it was too late to risk going all the way. We went on to Memphis the next day and stayed over at the old Gale So, which everybody in those days liked and knew, for 2 or 3 days. Then we drove on to Enid. We even ferried the river up here by Tulsa.
The Arkansas?
And 2 or 3 creeks. We'd have to detour around Cottonwood and those little towns in Arkansas, you know.
Was your husband a veteran of World War I?
Oh, yeah.
Did he talk about what he did in the war?
Yes, he did. For one thing, he was gassed. He went through, for one thing, this is more important maybe, he survived the gas all right, but he had a battlefield promotion because he was he was a 2nd lieutenant, and he was leading a platoon, whatever that is. I think it's what they call a company now. And in the Meuse-Argonne offensive. And he had the battlefield promotion because of the way he took over and led the men.
Did he ever talk about life in the trenches in France?
Yes. Yes.
What did he say about that?
Well, a lot has been written about his interviews. I don't know that I can repeat as well as it has been written. But Armistice Day, to him, he said it wasn't a time for rejoicing, that when the guns stopped and everything was still, I guess they were praying, is what they were praying, thanking goodness that the war was over. But they stopped still, put down their arms. The silence was it impressed him. He remembered it all his life, how he felt. One of the good newspaper items was one of George's interviews on Armistice Day, about 40 years later. He was very articulate. I don't suppose you knew him.
Yes.
Well, his vocabulary was amazing. And he was a letter of the law man, very strict. And he would say to me sometimes, some of them hate me now, but these things that I have to do will save their lives later. And it was true, you know. And he said a lot of credit.
And where was he from?
Carrier. He's a Cherokee Strip native. He was born, and he began telling this so that his family has told me, he was born 2 years, 2 months, and 2 days after the run. On November the 18th, 1895. In a sod house, and I have a picture of the sod house.
Did his father make the run?
No, he didn't, because he had land in another state, and he was not allowed to make the run. But he and his wife and 2 little children came down here to see it. And 2 of his brothers and 2 of her brothers made the run and staked a claim and made a relinquishment to George's mother and father soon after, and they proved up the claim. So while he didn't literally make the run, he did prove up the claim where George was born.
Did you ever talk to the family members that made the run? What that day was like?
Yes.
Tell me what the story they told you about making the run.
Well, Dad, George's father's twin brother, Sarah Shields, and this was before they were married, made the run. And she would tell in great detail about the trumped up buggy or wagon. They had equipped it with some water and various things, and the stakes ready to, and the old man that was driving the team, I've forgotten his name, would say to Aunt Sarah as they went racing across the prairie and just rattling around all over the wagon seat, and finally they came to a place and he'd say to her, "Jump out, Sarah, jump out." She thought that was, and she was scared to death she broke her neck, you know, jumping out of that trumped up wagon. But she got out and got her claim, and afterwards, she married Uncle Jake, and they lived on it.
Where did they stake their claim?
Out here by Carrier. Nearly all of them did.
How far is that from Enid?
Well, Carrier's about 10 or 15 miles. About 15 miles. It's west and a little north.
Have you heard about who Enid was named after?
I've heard several things, haven't you? One was one of Tennyson's poems. What was that? The girl's name was Enid. And somebody trumped up the story of it. It meant food, a place to stop and get water and food, and they spelled it backwards, dine. Dine spelled backwards. And then wasn't there some official whose wife...
The railroad that had a daughter.
Yeah, that was there. A railroad official had a daughter named Enid.
Did you know, were there many Indians in this area?
No. The first Indian I ever saw in my life was John Levi. He was one of the big football heroes. He was a great big man and typically Indian, and because my sister and I, she was smaller than I was, and they told him that we never had seen an Indian before, and I'm sure they put him up to it, but he would walk up behind you and you wouldn't know he was anywhere near, and then say something in an Indian voice, and we'd scream and screech like we thought they were going to be scalped immediately.
Now who was he?
John Levi. He became a very famous football player.
Was that here in Enid?
Yeah, that's that Iron Man.
Oh, okay. He was on that team then?
Yes. I want you to look at my picture in here.
Mm-hmm.
The Iron Men. They were a big attraction in Enid those years.
Was your husband was in the 45th Division?
Last. No, in World War I he was in the 36th Division. In World War II in the 45th Division. And then when the division was reorganized, they streamlined it and took one of the battalions out of the regiment which he commanded, the 189th. They gave him all of the battalions that were left over, and he commanded then the 202nd Field Artillery Group with about 3,500 men. And they went to Muskogee. The new camp was opened about that time. But he wasn't there very long, not quite a year, when the War Department ordered him to go to China on a special mission to serve as a counselor and a liaison officer for a Chinese army. And so he went to China by air, met General Stilwell very casually. The first time he ever saw him, he came in with a trench coat on and no insignia showing, and walked up to him and said, I'm Stilwell. And he liked him very much, he admired him very much. But he was on a reconnaissance mission, I guess you'd call it, down to the Indochina border, which was near Vietnam, later activity. When the convoy he was commanding, as he was a senior officer, was ambushed. And he was in the front truck, and when these people appeared, he got out and stood in front of them and began shooting at them and telling everybody what to do. And for that, he received recognition with Silver Star, which Stilwell signed in person. That's the next highest decoration to the Congressional Medal. Of course, he had also a Purple Heart because he was shot. He had 7 bullets in his body. One was removed, but he lived with the rest of them the rest of his life.
What time period was this?
What time?
When he was in China. What year was that?
42.
42.
It was 43. 43.
And it was the Japanese that ambushed him.
Uh-huh.
Was your husband in the National Guard between World War I and World War II?
He was continuously in service from May the 11th, 1917 till he died in 1984. When he came back from World War I, he had a reserve commission, and then he joined the National Guard, and then he recruited and commanded a battery right here on the campus at Phillips. And while he was playing football, he not only played football and commanded the battery. He was president of the student body and selling automobiles and things like that. He's always been a very busy, active person.
Was he called out by the governor when they had, like when Governor Murray shut down the oil fields?
I don't believe so.
That was the 1930s, I think.
I don't believe so.
Okay, what about the bridge
Yeah, the
incident?
bridge. Now, I don't think he went down to the bridge either, but he was in the legislature for 6 sessions
He was.
as a representative and as a senator. And then he ran for Congress and lost by 34 votes in the runoff.
When was he in the House?
Let's see. I can't remember. About 30 to maybe earlier to 36, I believe it was.
Did he ever talk about Bill Murray?
Oh yes, we knew Bill and his wife and son and all of them.
Tell me about Bill Murray. What do you think of him?
He thought he was smart. He thought he was a very wise person, really, but he played the part of a mumpkin. Used strange language and grammar sometimes, you know. He was quite an impressive person. You know, he went to Bolivia and organized a state or something down there before he was governor. And I remember once we were at the governor's mansion for dinner and he was telling about his Bolivian experience. And Johnston Murray, Bill's son, later was governor, and he was one of the National Guard officers under George on the 189th, and we went to their house too.
Did you know his first wife, Johnson Murray's first wife?
Yeah.
Marion?
First wife, no, I knew the one, what was her name, Winnie? Winnie? What was her name?
I knew the wife that went to Bolivia with him, was Johnson.
No.
And then they were separated.
I knew the red-headed one that was
Yeah.
his wife when he was governor.
Right. Okay, that was his second wife.
They lived at Tonkawa for a time. Wasn't it Tonkawa?
I'm
Maybe
not
it was
sure.
Ponca City.
Yeah.
Governor Marlin was governor part of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And George's particular friend was Lou Wentz. He was a Republican
Did you know him?
power very well.
Tell me about Lou Wentz.
Oh, he was one of the kindest, most comfortable persons to be around you could imagine. Very thoughtful and considerate of people. I know we went to Ponca City once when George was campaigning, and he invited everybody in our party to have lunch and go swimming. It was 36 when the weather was so terribly hot. I'll never forget getting in that pool. It was just an oasis. We gave our son a pony.
Did you know Manuel Herrick?
No. I guess maybe I saw him, but I didn't really know him.
He was a congressman from Oklahoma in the 20s.
Yeah.
Y'all have any questions?
Lou Wentz had the Arcade Hotel.
Yeah, lived there. And we all
Arcade
ate
Hotel.
lunch and we went out to his swimming pool.
He was highway commissioner at one time.
That's right. That was while George was in the Senate, I believe, and there's a picture somewhere of a hearing they were having, something about the road stuff investigation. And Lou Wentz laughed about it to me later. He says, I think George would have hit him if they'd said anything he didn't like about me.
50 years plus.
I told him a while ago that genealogy is my hobby. I'm a member of UDC, and that's the United Daughters of the Confederacy, and I'm a past president of the Real Daughters Club, which is the group in UDC whose own fathers fought in the Confederate Army. And as national president, I made a survey to see how many of us were left. And that's in the UDC, and I came up with 989 people, And of course, a lot of them who were left were not members of UDC. That's surprising. That war was over, you know, it was way over 100 years ago. But those old Confederates,
How old was your father when you were born?
almost 60. And my mother was almost 40. And I was the youngest of 7 children, 5 boys and 2 girls. I was that's a lucky place to be in, the 7th child, and besides that, they never were surprised or concerned about what I did. They coped with everything you could think of with all the rest of them, and I could ride the horse around the country and get home after dark. Nobody said a word. They weren't scared I'd be kidnapped. They're a wonderful family. I'm the last one.
How did the Depression of the 1930s affect you and your family?
Well, George and I were married, of course, then, and he was a beginning lawyer, which in those days was said to be 17 years starvation. But we managed to get along all right. We survived it. And we bought this house soon after. We hadn't been able to, and we had not bought a home until after that. And that was quite a while. We had been out of town quite a lot and couldn't afford either to buy a house, I guess. But anyway, when this one came up for sale, it was what we wanted. It had a wood fireplace and a nice yard already planted. We lived here now nearly 50 years. I've loved it.
How bad were the dust storms?
Oh, terrible. Dad used to say it was darker than when you had your eyes shut.
What does the dust storm look like when it's coming towards you?
It's like fog. We were out on the Panhandle one time driving. You couldn't see the ornament on the front of the car. It was that dark. And you were afraid to stop and park for fear somebody would hit you, and you were afraid to go on because you couldn't see the road. It was really something.
Did you ever consider going to California those days?
No.
What did you do during World War II when your husband was overseas?
I stayed here. I stayed home. Our son was in school in OU, and then he had an appointment to West Point, went up to the academy, and I was all alone I couldn't even get gas to drive, so I worked for a couple of years with the Department of Public Welfare and enjoyed it.
What did you do for welfare?
I was a counselor, whatever you call them.
A caseworker?
Caseworker. Now I had a case, could get gasoline, and they'd even pay for it. And I ran over the county to see people. Eventually they gave me every one of the, I shouldn't say this, all of the blacks. I had the whole caseload, and I understand them. I can live with them. I like them. They always said something funny. It was just really exciting to talk to them. I had an old Negro man who was blind, and the only person living with him was an 8-year-old great-granddaughter. And I had to check his expenses, and I said, "What about laundry?" And he says, "Well, I have to pay such and such." I'd forgotten the amount, and I repeated it, and I guess he thought I was questioning it. He says, "Yes, we has to have our laundry done because Ruby's in school now, and I aims to keep her sanitary."
When Roosevelt was president in the 30s, what did you think of the New Deal?
Well, I remember my brother, who had stock, was furious when they killed the little pigs. You know, he had some very revolutionary ideas about what to do about the Depression, and it wasn't popular with a lot of people. But I don't remember any adverse reaction in our family. George was a Republican, a strong Republican all his life. I was a Democrat. When I went to register and to vote the first time, my father said to me, "Honey, just stamp it under the rooster. That's all you have to do." But eventually, when George was running for office and I felt a little out of place, I changed my registration. So I'm registered as a Republican, but I still am a Kentucky Democrat.
What about Social Security when you were first set up?
I was teaching at the time, and I took it immediately. It was glad to. And it worked fine as far as I'm concerned. Of course, I didn't get a great deal. But with George's retirement and so on, we managed always.
I was going to ask, what were you doing when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor?
We were having dinner right here in our dining room. I saw that in the paper. Lloyd Spencer was here having dinner with us on Sunday, and both George and George A. were here. And Opal Barnes, do you all remember Opal Barnes? Phoned us and said, "Are you listening to the radio? They bombed Pearl Harbor." And from that, all the men, George was already in service. That was after the 45th had been mobilized. So all of his people began calling him up, "What are we going to do now?" I remember Jess Larson and his wife driving in here, all perturbed about what we were going to do next. It was really exciting.
Did any of the families go down to Lawton when the 45th was mobilized? Went down there for a year. Did you go down to Lawton?
Yeah. The 45th was mobilized in 1940, September the 16th, wasn't it? I think it was. So you see, they'd been in service already for over a year. George went and took the whole regiment.
What was Lawton like in 1940?
Never like it is now, so far as I know. I stayed at the hotel when I went down there. Oh, I'll take it back. I stayed with an old friend part of the time when I could go and stay a few days. But my son was here in school, and we never left home, really. We just shut up the house and we'd come back from time to time, whenever we could.
Was there a big celebration here when the war ended? World War II?
I can't remember. Can you all? I guess there was.
When World War II ended, was there a big celebration here in town?
There was, yes, and during the wartime, we bought B-25s from the base for bomb drives and put them on the footer. We had, and then after, whatever, the big celebration.
Well, George was home and in the hospital. He was in and out of hospitals for a year or two.
Did he talk about what he did in the war, World War II?
Oh, yeah. If anybody listened, he'd tell them all about it.
You remember any stories he told you?
Not really. I hadn't thought about him overall, what he thought. He was not a pacifist. He was military. He was a typical military. As I said before, a letter of the law. If the boys saw him down on the street in Lawton, they'd feel the buttons to see if they were all fastened, Everything was in order. They'd turn around and go the other way for fear something would be noticed.
Tell me some more about your research in genealogy, your family background, what you found out.
Very interesting. Very interesting. My particular family has been in every war, it seems to me like. Daughters of the American Revolution, of course, keeps a permanent record, and that was one reason we went into it in the first place. And the colonial dames is limited to colonists who came in prior to 1700. So from that, I haven't gone any further back to join, but I have the records which would take us to Magna Carta. The dames, the daughters of Magna Carta, 1066, which was the first Bill of Rights.
What was the date?
1066, I believe it was.
That's-
That's the Battle of Hastings.
Battle of Hastings.
What was the date then? Something like that.
1215.
1215. Well, I got 200 years off. That's
What,
not
200
bad.
years?
Well, anyway, the Magna Carta is what our Constitution was, our Bill of Rights is based on. And the daughters, the colonial dames, have the complete record for the 21 signers, and anyone who gets as far as colonial dames, they will take your membership, your application, and trace it back to see if you find one of them. And nearly everybody does too, because
Well, I've heard
they've got so
that.
many records.
If you can trace your family tree back to, I think, 1600, that you're related to most living Europeans.
I can believe it. I do believe it. Well, genealogy is like a crossword puzzle, a family tree, you know. You get one branch and it leads to another one. And then you're curious, you want to keep on going. And you find out so many unexpected, spectacular things to talk about.
Tell me some spectacular things from your life.
I said that and now I can't think of it.
What's your favorite childhood memory?
Well, let's see. Probably riding. I loved horses. I rode anything that we had.
Did you ride side saddle or stride?
I rode astride. Now, my dad thought that my sister and me, the youngest, ought to have side saddles, so he bought us one. And as soon as I got out of sight of him, I'd put my leg over and ride astride on my side saddle. But I could stay on any of them. I rode them all. And from that, I still enjoy the races, especially the Derby, the Kentucky Derby,
That's
the
it.
granddaddy of them all.
What kind of mischief did you get into as a little girl?
Oh, I was a good little girl. Let me see, what did I do? As I said, the seventh child, they don't pay much attention to you. My father never touched me in his life to punish me. I remember Mother patted me once because I went out and played in the dust right after she'd shampooed my hair.
Tell me about your early Christmases, what you remember. What kind of toys you got for Christmas?
Dogs, firecrackers. You remember firecrackers in Kentucky?
Yes.
We always had firecrackers, Roman candles, and the old folks would shoot off guns. That was part of Christmas. They still do it.
Would you have a Christmas program at school?
Yes. Yeah.
Was Christmas the biggest?
Yeah.
Was Christmas the biggest holiday you celebrated?
Yes, I think so.
What about the 4th of July?
4th of July generally was picnics, family picnics, one or so of our houses. We didn't have any swimming pools, and the nearest place we could really go swimming and enjoy it was Reelfoot Lake, which is about 20 miles south of us down the Mississippi. It was formed by an earthquake. And the old folks said, and I guess it's written in history, that a tornado crossed the river and you could see the bottom of the river. And the earth cracked open, and when it filled with water, they formed that lake. and it's 20 miles long. It's a sportsman's paradise. It has every kind of fish and fowl and game opportunities in the world, I guess. So they have cabins there, and we'd go take a cabin or even a tent and swim in that thing and play in the boats, that sort of thing. Nobody dared swim in the river. That river is our town is on a bend, and nobody knows how far the water has eaten out under those bluffs. It's built on bluffs. One row of houses, one street level, and the next one down lower, like Natchez. So when a storm comes, they run for high ground. They don't want to fall in the river. Still do.
When you were at Phillips University, what did you do for recreation?
We went to the ball games. We were pretty busy, that's all I remember. I wasn't athletic. I tried basketball once, and they told me no, I couldn't play, I was too dainty. I played tennis, especially back at Milligan, because my beau at that time was a champion. So when he had to play doubles, he'd say, come on, you can be my partner, and all you have to do is lop it over the net, and I'll do the rest. And he did. We'd win. His name was Bob Taylor, the son of Governor Taylor, who ran against his brother for governor in Tennessee of our promised family. Little Bob was my first beau, and the whole family adopted me while I was up there. Their house was right next to the campus. He's still a federal judge, Knoxville, Tennessee, Robert L. Taylor. If he hears this, he'll know I haven't forgotten him.
Do you all have any?
I might point out one thing. There were a number of players from that football team at that time. Steve Owens later coached the New York Giants.
That's right.
And they compared John Levi to Jim Thorpe, and in fact, some thought he was better.
Yeah.
A better athlete than even Jim Thorpe.
He had a tragic death.
Yes,
He was stabbed to death by a girlfriend. I think if he hadn't done that, he might have won that. Be more honored than Jim Thorpe.
I was fortunate enough to know a number of those players in later years.
And I want you to look
Lloyd
at that
Spencer,
picture. You'll see.
I had a lot of playing with Lloyd when he was county superintendent, and
Uh-huh.
I worked with him quite often then.
Where was he from?
Marshall.
Levi.
Oh, Levi, he was from Kansas, wasn't he? Where was he from? Haskell? No, he coached at Haskell after he left Phillips. I've forgotten. Well, let me see what I put down. I wanted to be sure to tell you. I guess I've talked too much already.
Some years ago, there was a paper, we had a paper that listed a number of the games that they played in those years, and that was when they played the University of Texas. They beat OU, the University of Texas. They had a terrific football team.
They really did. That was amazing.
In later years, they had some real good basketball teams where a number of those made All-American, like Ray Piper and Bud Browning, and a number of those.
Yeah. F. Shelton. Several on that team are in the Hall of Fame, different ones. Well, Milam, Joe Milam was in the one down at, not Edmond, Alva. One of them.
Now, what's this big mirror you have in the house?
The mirror,
Hold on, just a second.
acted. In fact, I had stage fright.
No, you didn't even stutter.
What's the story
You
of the
want me
mirror?
to turn this light off or leave it on?
Leave it on. You know what's the story behind the mirror?
Yes. When George came up with the 189th Field Artillery to parade on the 4th of July, his executive officer, Tom McMurray, Colonel Tom McMurray, came also, and the McMurrays came out here to see us. And they looked at this room with the 16-foot ceiling to the cornice 12 feet, and they said to each other, "This is the place for the mirror." That's the first time we ever heard of it. And they told us that they had it in storage, that Tom's father was an early day lawyer at McAllister, and he represented the Chickasaw Choctaw Indians in litigation against the United States government and won his case. And his fee, not his settlement, but his fee was $1 million. He cashed the check and brought it home in a suitcase. Well, that was Jeff McMurray, and being a flamboyant kind of person, he had built a great big house at McAllister. They had 10 children. But when Jeff McMurray was in Washington, at DuPont Circle, the old home of Senator Stewart from Nevada was being torn down and the furnishings disposed of. And this mirror, and one about the size and shape of this doorway, and some other gold leaf furniture was being auctioned off. Well, he bought these things and brought them back and put them in his big house at McAllister. And that was about 1900. Well, finally, that house, the children had grown up and left home, and they had some sort of settlement with the family on account of the location, and it was raised. So nobody in the family had a ceiling tall enough for this mirror. So it had been in storage down at McAllister for some 25 years, just lying on its side in a storage place. Well, that was during the war, and George was getting ready to go to China, and Tom eventually went the other direction, went to Philippines. So when we all got home, they brought up the subject of the mirror again, and we went down to look at it, and the place was locked up, and we didn't get to see it. So we had it sent up here by just a furniture van. They brought it up here, and forgot the base. They didn't bring the base. So we had to lay it down on its side until the next trip for the furniture people. But eventually, we had it installed, and it's been standing there ever since. It's 12 feet to the cornice. The mirror has never been redone, you know. And the gold leaf has not been replaced. There were a few more things on it. There was something hanging over at the top of those two sides that looked like a bunch of grapes hanging out like this, you know. And something else down here. But we thought it looked plainer and would hold up better in a room like this and had it more ornate. And we just loved it. It's our pride and joy. At the house on DuPont Circle,
And who's that?
Senator Stewart, Walter M. Stewart. Here's his autobiography, William M. Stewart of Nevada. Served in the United States Senate about 40 years. He was there during Lincoln's administration, and in that book he tells how he had an appointment with Abraham Lincoln the day he was assassinated. And since he was a one of the owners and operators of the Comstock Lode gold mines in Nevada. He was a very wealthy man. And his wife, we always said, was an ancient pearl master. She was the lady who gave the big parties and all that. Of course, he died long before we had this mural. But it does have a real background. We don't know whether he bought it in Europe second hand or whether it was new. And how much he paid for it, he doesn't say anything about it in his book.
Okay, tell me about the picture again.
Yes, that is the sod house where my husband was born. It's on the plain out there, the farm area, about 1900. And the people in it, it's painted by Charles Hutchinson Young, George's nephew, from a photograph made in 1900. And the little boy on the tricycle is George. The girl next to him in the red dress is his sister, and then his mother, his father, and his brother standing over on the cave, nude, is holding a Quackenbush rifle. Did you ever hear of a Quackenbush rifle?
No, ma'am.
Well, George, they told me over the phone this morning that that rifle, at the time it was bought, cost $1.75. And that it could be obtained with Octagon soap wrappers. Well, George said so many times over the years, Newt had a rifle. I never did get a rifle. So finally, our son made him one. He got two old ones from a pawn shop somewhere and put them together. You want to see it? I'm sure it is pretty soon. And so we have the Quackenbush rifle. Incidentally, nearly everything that was left by George's request and arrangement that was military was given to the 45th Division Museum. And they sent 2 people up here with a truck last month and took a lot of the things that we had, like 10 helmets, I believe, of both George and George A. Jr. This is a picture of my son here. He was 30 years in the American Airlines. After he had served in World War I in an infantry division and went back to school, and then in World War II he had an appointment as a cadet to fly and went into the United States Air Force. He flew the Pacific 100 times. That was from Tokyo back to Hawaii and all the trips he took. And he also flew what they called the embassy run, which was from Tokyo to every place in the
Mama, she's the first guy that come along and offered her so much for them mules to sell all the mules. He's afraid his children would get hurt. See, I had a sister just older than I was. She farmed just like a man. She worked out in there. She drove her 4-head horses on the plow, on a harrow or anything like that. See.
Mm-hmm. How many wagons did you have in the farm?
How many wagons?
Yes, sir.
Well, now we had low-wheel wagons, a hay rack. We had about 2 or 3 grain wagons. See?
What brand were they?
I think one of them was a Weber. And the other was Weber. One of them was a Weber. whatever, and the other was slipped my mind.
What maintenance did you have to pull on the wagons?
Huh?
What maintenance did you have to pull on those wagons?
Oh, we generally hauled wheat and stuff on there. See, that's all we did.
How many bushels of wheat could you have in one wagon load?
Generally run around 55, 56 bushel on a load.
Did you have your own granary?
Yeah, we had granaries, but a lot of it, we hauled a lot of it to town too, right from the machine. Dad always said that you had to get 10 cents a bushel more if you put it in a bin and then take it back out. You'd have to have 10 cents a bushel more to break even. So we really had quite a few neighbors come in and we'd haul a lot of it to town up in there. We put quite a little in the bin too, but then
How big was your granary?
well, they had 3 bins in the barn. The barn was in there. It had 3 bins in it. And the bins, I imagine, was about something like about 10 by 20. The bins that was in there.
What maintenance did you have to pull on the wagons to keep them up?
What maintenance?
Yeah.
Well, we had to keep the tires on there once in a while. Them tires would get loose. You'd have to have them set so they wouldn't come off.
How'd you set them?
We generally took them to a blacksmith shop and had them do that. Because they had, they'd get kind of loose and dry, and then the wheel, that metal that was around the outside, would slip off if you didn't get it pulled down tight, see. So ever so often you had to have that done to keep them from coming off.
What else would you have to do to the wagon?
Well, in other words, you had to keep them in shape so they wouldn't leak, see. In other words, if they had holes or anything, you had to patch them or fix them up or something, see. See, you had to make them leak-proof. And as a rule, when they're in new and pretty good shape, why, you didn't have too much trouble with them. But when they got older, and then they start to leak and or something, see, you'd have to fix them.
What about the axles?
Huh?
You have to grease the axles?
Oh, yeah, you had to grease it every so often.
How often would you have to grease it?
Now, generally, if you worked that 3 or 4 days, why, you'd have to put some grease on them. Take them off and put axle grease on them. Take them out.
What type of wood makes the best wagon bed?
What kind of wood? Well, now, I think cedar would make about as good as any of them. Most of them.
Did you ever work on cattle drives around here?
Huh?
Did you ever work cattle drives?
Cattle drive?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Drove cattle, yeah.
Black Beauty axle grease.
Yeah. Yeah, generally that's what we used at that time now.
Did you buy that? How big was the container the axle grease came in?
Well, It was a bucket about like that.
About 2 or 3 gallon bucket?
Yeah. Yeah, we'd come in there.
I've also heard of people driving the wagon into the water to swell the wood and the wheels.
Yeah. A lot of them took them the wheels off and soak them in their tanks, see?
Did you do that?
Yeah, we've done that, yeah. When they get dry, in the summertime get dry, and they shrink, them tires would come off, and you take them off and lay them in a water tank for a day or so, and shrink them back up, see? So they swell back up.
What keeps the wheel on the wagon?
Huh?
What keeps that wheel on the wagon? What holds it on?
On the wagon, there's a nut that holds it on. See, you got a place about that wide. It's beveled, and your wheel goes on, and on the end of it is a nut there, see? You screw that nut on there tight, see?
How do you take the nut off?
With a wrench, you got a wrench. It comes like this way, like that. See, it comes in that wrench. You have one with it, see?
The wrench comes with the wagon?
Yeah.
Where you keep it?
It generally is put in there between the clevis, the end gate. It's in there where you hook the horses on.
To the devil tree?
The devil tree, see? And the devil tree, it comes in the center of that tongue, and generally that's where your pin is sticking in there. It generally always sticks right in there with the outfit, so you'll have it any time you need it.
How often would you have a cattle drive?
Cattle drive, well, generally when we done the cattle drive, in the earlier day when you sold cattle, see, we drove them to the market. That's before the trucks and everything was in, see. After your trucks and stuff comes in, well then they didn't do that anymore.
Where was the market?
Well, you generally take them to market. Some of them would ship them to Wichita or Oklahoma City, and you'd drive them to your closest town, Lahoma or Enid. See, I've drove along several times to Enid up here. See, fella comes around. They generally come around, and fella'd come around and buy cattle, and they get a carload of them bought. Then we'd take the horses, pick them up, and drive them in, see, get them in town, load them in a boxcar, and they ship them generally to Wichita or Oklahoma City. Most generally went to Wichita, the market.
Tell me how you organize a cattle drive. What do you do?
Well, fella had to go around, fella buys these cattle, see. He buys them up, and he has a certain day. He goes around and picks them up, see. In other words, you have a horseback, see, and you pick them up and drive them. Go from one place to the other to pick them up, see. Maybe one place he'd bought one, or maybe he'd bought 3 or 4, and you just drive them up until you round them up, because the guy that bought them knew where they was at. I've been on several of those drives, pick them up.
How many head of cattle would he buy at one time?
Well, he generally I think it takes about 30 or 40 in a boxcar.
And how many boxcars would would you fill up?
Huh?
How many boxcars would you fill with cattle?
Well, generally, when they got one car full, they pick them up and take them off, see, as a rule.
Were they branded when he bought them?
No, we didn't have to brand cattle. People didn't steal like they do now, see.
So you never branded your cattle?
No. We have branded a few of them, but not very many. We've had some stolen here of late years. We didn't have branded, see.
So then you would drive about 30 cattle to town on the cattle drive?
Yeah.
How many men does it take to drive 30 cattle?
Well, generally, lots of times it's two of us drive, sometimes three, two. So I drove, me and another boy drove. I bought the farm over there, and they bought a farm up a prairie. And we drove, me and another neighbor boy, we drove them down the prairie from here, see. We stayed along the road at night. We put them in a corral at some neighbor, found some place where we could lock them up at night. And can't drive them quite that far in one day and pick them up, see.
Ever have the cattle get away from you, stampede?
No, you journey your horseback, you're after him. If one of them takes off, well, you go round him up and bring him back in a hurry.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any questions?
Well, going back to the wagons, once in a while the old coupling pole would break on you, the one that held it together underneath. You remember that?
Yeah.
You'd have that happen once in a while. Of course, the floor was the main thing, and keeping the tires on the wooden wheel wagons. And then your iron wheel wagons, when they came out with them, and they were a lower wagon,
Yeah.
and they had wider tires on them.
Yeah.
And they were a lot easier to drive, and it wasn't so hard for the horses to pull. And when he was talking about mules, my idea was always it was mule sense instead of horse sense. A mule had more sense than a horse, normally. He knew when to quit when he had enough work. And
Yeah, I'd done a lot of horse trading and stuff
Yeah.
like that. But I know I always wanted a pair of black mules with the white noses, you know. You've seen them.
Yeah.
I traded me for a pair, and I'll tell you what, took them out, and the neighbor boy was helping me. I had 4 of them hooked to the go devil, and I didn't know where you know what a go devil was.
yes, anyway,
And up on there,
you used those.
and
Did you, when the early days of Lahoma, did you remember that pretty well too, do you not?
well, Lahoma was one of the best little towns that was around here.
Yes. But, and that was back in about what years, Fred, when you first remember Lahoma as a
That was back in 1907, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, down in there.
yeah, long about statehood time.
You see, that was the days in the German settlement come around there, you know, and they had a lot of Germans in there. And they had good business. They had 2 banks in there, and they had about everything. They had a mill down there. They had a hotel there. They had 2 hardware stores, 2 or 3 grocery stores. And it was really a going town.
It was a real nice town at that time for a small town.
They had a band there at that time too, with outfitting there. And the 4th of July, they had a real celebration down there.
And when you first started to school, to go back to that, I think you told me one time that you couldn't even school.
No, I couldn't even say yes, no. No, see, we always talked German, high and low, both German.
Did the kids make fun of you?
Huh?
Did the other kids make fun of you if you couldn't speak English?
Yeah, we had an awful time in school. Yeah.
Where did you start the school?
Down here at Vernon.
Was it a one-room schoolhouse?
Yeah. Yeah, there's a one-room schoolhouse there, and there was 53 children going there.
One teacher?
Yeah, one teacher.
How does one teacher teach all the grades?
We teached all 8 of them,
How'd she do it?
yeah. She just did it. Golly, anyhow, we had teachers in there that could just handle them anyhow. They had all 8th grades, and I was about 3 years in the first reader. I had a heck of a time, The English teacher couldn't even say yes, see.
Did the teachers try to help you speak English?
Well, she tried to, but them days, in the early days, them teachers had people going there that were 21 years of age. See, them early years, they'd go down in there. I had a lot of trouble over there, yeah. No, it was awful hard to go through school with them, to get through there. But after I once got on it, see, I went one year to German school, to Brookwood School, see, over there, was confirmed in church up there.
The teachers in those days, when they had the one-room schools, normally about every 3 miles, weren't they? The little one-room school. Now, they usually pretty well planned out all their classes for the day, or they couldn't have got them all in, could they?
Yeah, they had all of them in. You see, this used to be every 3 miles there was a schoolhouse, 3 miles square. That's the way their thing was set up. And now you wouldn't think that there was that many people live in a 3 mile square area, see, that'd be that many children in there. But people had big families, see, and some of them had 80 acres and some had 160. They didn't come like here that some guy had about 3 or 4, 5, 6 quarter section of land, see. God, they made a living on, some of them made it on 80 acres, some even less.
Could you tell us about some of the games you played in those days, baseball and
we played
different types of games when you went to school?
Yeah, we played baseball, and we played shinny a lot too. I don't know whether you guys know what shinny is.
Tell me about it. What is shinny?
Well, you have a little old ball, thing about that big. Sometimes you use a tin can, and you had a stick and you'd choose sides, to hit it so you could get it over the line. See, you had a line. You had the line, you see, when you got, you'd start, well, we'd start here, and you had to get it over this line. That'd count a point, it'd count a score, see.
Kind of like hockey?
Yeah, and see, score up in here, well, you had your guys on the outfit, and they'd knock that ball, little old They had a little old wooden piece of block about that way. You hit that, well, they'd stop it, and then they'd drive it back, and you'd be going back and forth on that thing all the time. So we played that a lot of times.
What's the biggest holiday you celebrated back then?
Biggest holiday, Christmas is about the biggest.
Christmas? Tell me about your early Christmases.
We generally have a big program and something like that. In them days, as a rule, each school as a rule, they usually had a pie supper, a box supper, for entertainment. See, the big schoolhouse was full, with them. You'd have a pie supper, box supper, whichever way you wanted. And then they'd get up and sell the boxes, and they'd have one for the prettiest girl, one for the homeliest man, and it got pretty hot, see, up in there when you got working that way.
Mm-hmm. What kind of toys would you get for Christmas? What kind of gifts? What kind of gifts would you get for Christmas?
Well, the gifts wasn't quite like they was here now. They're not as expensive as they are now, see. But you'd all have a little Christmas present, see. Lots of times in them days, place to have tin foil, you'd string popcorn on the string and put that around the Christmas tree for, ornament, the Christmas tree.
Did you have a tree in the home?
Yeah, we always had Dad always had a Christmas tree.
What kind of tree was it?
Cedar tree.
Did you have a tree in the school also?
Yeah. Yeah, we have them, yeah. Yeah, we have them. We'd have a program, see, on there with that.
Do you remember Statehood Day?
Statehood Day?
Yes, sir. When Oklahoma became a state, 1907.
1907. I remember when it happened, yeah. But as far as I wasn't about 7 years old, but I remember when it became a statehood, see. But I didn't have anything to do with it in other ways.
Was there a big celebration around here?
Yeah, they had a big celebration about it at the time. But I wasn't involved in it.
Did you ever meet Governor France?
Who?
Governor France, Frank France.
France, yeah, I met him, yeah.
Did you know him very well?
Well, I knew him personally, that is not too well. France.
Now, I understand all the saloons closed at Statehood. I understand all the saloons closed when Oklahoma became a state. The saloons in Enid and Lahoma. Were there many saloons around?
Bones closed.
Yeah, the saloons. All the whiskey, beer and whiskey.
Oh, saloons, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're closed. Yeah, they was closed.
Were there many saloons in Lahoma?
Yeah, there was saloons in Lahoma.
What did they do with all the whiskey?
Well, I don't know, but I know one thing. My dad, when he come over here in 1900, they had a saloon down there at Lahoma, and they had a petition out to sign it to close up the saloon. And Dad was a strong church member, and when he come over here, the first thing he done was he went out to raise funds to build a church, see? His church that sits right out here is the one that Dad had built. He went out and collected, and this guy where the church now stands his name was Jack Thomas, and he signed a petition that he wanted it closed, and they got on to him and give him the dickens for signing the one to close the saloon down in Oklahoma. So Mr. Thomas told my dad if he'd get his name off of that petition down there at Oklahoma where he signed it to close the outfit, he'd give him the land where to build a church on. So Dad went and got his name off the petition, and he gave him this land up there, see? Went up there to build a church, and they built a church on it. And it was built in 1900, I think.
Is it still there?
Yeah, still there.
What's the name of the church?
Used to go called Ganella, now it's called, they got a different name, but it's a religious name, but it was, in the early days, this was Ganella, see. It was Ganella. In the early days, they built that church. 1901, I think, is when they got that thing was built. He went and he collected that thing, see.
Do you remember World War One?
Yeah, I remember that well.
Tell me about it.
We got in trouble over that thing.
What happened?
Well, see, my dad was from Germany up there, and the guys had it in for the Germans. See, these English people down here at Oklahoma, that's what busted up Oklahoma, see. They formed a council of defense over there, see. And we had money in the bank up there at Oklahoma, and they come over, they formed the council of defense, and they come over here to collect money, see. See, Dad is dead. Dad died in 1917, just a few weeks before they got into this war. And they come over here, and they have formed what is called a council of defense, and they went around. The English fellows got together, them people up there, and formed the council of defense, and they was going to take land away from these German people, see, and run them back to Germany. Anyway, council of defense come over there and told Mother, she couldn't talk English very good, told Mother that she had to buy $1,200 worth of Liberty bonds, see. That was her quota they'd set up for her, see, she had to buy it. Well, Mother talked to me in German, said, well, I thought you ought, whether we ought to buy some or not. Well, see, we had some wheat. Wheat was pretty near up close $3, and Dad had some money in the Oklahoma bank, see. So anyhow, they told him that we had the money, and we had to buy it. So finally, Mama said, well, maybe we better go ahead. We have trouble. Maybe we better go ahead and buy that $1,200. Okay, we bought it. 2 weeks later, here come the preacher down there, and old man Zirkle over there, and come over there and our place up there. We was outside standing by the porch, and they told us that we had bought $1,200, and we had to donate a certain percent, which was $60, to YMCA or for the soldiers to get tobacco and things with, see. So we didn't know what to do about it, and Mother said to me in German whether we thought we ought to do this, just give them $60. And the preacher jumped up, he cussed her out and told her, said we ought to put you in a box and ship you back over to Germany where you belong. Because Mother couldn't talk English very good, see. And I was just a kid, and he cussed her out, and told her to kill her and put her in a box and send her back to Germany. So I made up my mind when I grew up, when I met that preacher, I was going to whip him. It was the last thing I'd done. But I never did run onto him. He finally, when the boys come back, they run him out of here. Run that gang out of there.
What was his name?
I don't know what the name of the preacher was anymore. It's been so long ago. I didn't know whether I knew his name at the time, but anyhow, he was a preacher down there at the home, and he brought old Grandpa Zirkle and old man Zirkle along up here, see. And they went ahead, and that's what he told us, see. We had to buy it, we had those things. And they had the Council of Defense. And there's one Englishman living in our neighborhood. They mobbed him. They formed the Council of Defense. And they went around and made you sell your wheat, haul your wheat off to town. And Mr. Davis wouldn't do it, told him he lived here with the Germans and he didn't have no trouble with them and he wasn't about to haul it off. So they mobbed him. See? And,
what happened to him?
huh?
What happened to him?
Well, they mobbed him, got him mobbed up, see? But they beat him up, and I don't know whether he ever sold any or not. But he said he'd lived with a German settlement here all his life, and he never had no trouble with them. With the settlement, he was an Englishman, see. M.M. Davis, I don't know whether you knew of him or not. Got children around here, up in here, and so they have formed that Council of Defense, and they told you what you had to do, had to buy, and you had them, they was going to take their land away from them and run them back into Germany, see. And when the boys come back, see, we had a rotten deal. All them boys, them German boys that come in there, just as soon as they had to register and get on, they just took them right away, see. Well, I registered on my birthday. That last draft got me. See, I was 18 years old, and so this guy here in Enid had charge of this thing. He was an Englishman, so he sent me a card. He had told me when I registered to fill out 2 papers. One of them you had to send to the city, and the other one you had to send both of them to the city, see, and one of them they filled here in Enid, and the other one I had to fill out and send to Oklahoma City. So the day when I got 2 cards the same day, one of them I got from Enid, Class 1A. See, Dad had died, and so I took the 2 cards and went into Enid, see. I laid this one card down that he had sent, that guy had sent, forgot now what his name was, but anyhow, I said, what does this mean? He says, this means you got to be here Thursday afternoon at 1 o'clock to be here to leave, to go. So then I handed him the other card, and he looked at it. Well, he said, you won't have to come, because he said they put you in 3J, because you're the only one here at home to take care of the farm business. You're more important to raise some stuff at home than you are going over in service. So that's the way this thing went. It was rotten.
So you never had to go?
No. See, the war ended right after that. Shortly after that, the war ended. See that? See, that was in 1918.
What did you do on Armistice Day?
Huh?
What did you do on Armistice Day, the day the war ended?
What I done? We was all glad it was over with.
Was there a big celebration in the area?
Yeah, there was quite a celebration about it. People were happy because it was over with.
Mm-hmm. So when the boys got home, they drove this preacher and everybody out of town.
They took care of them, yes.
Now, who were the people that formed this self-defense league, or this defense league?
Well, one guy was a lumberman from the lumberyard. He was the chairman of the outfit. Come to find out, he hadn't bought $1 worth of bonds when they checked into him, see. And here he's out here making all these others buy these bonds, see. He was one of the head guys on that thing, see. It didn't take very long to run him out. They just didn't trade with him. Didn't have nothing to do with him. So there's nothing they could do, just pull out. Yeah, that Oklahoma was one of the greatest little towns there was.
Was it mainly a German settlement?
Huh?
Was it mainly a German settlement?
German settlements, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
See, there was mostly Germans around there, see. They got into it up in here. And they hadn't done anything wrong. The Germans hadn't done anything wrong. They all went to war when they was called on and everything. But when them boys got back, listen, things commenced to change. They took people that was with children, families and children. See, it didn't make a darn bit of difference. They just took them.
These are mainly Germans that they took?
Huh?
Mainly these were Germans that they took?
Yeah, they just took the Germans, yeah. That's the same way as me. He knew I was German descent too. He put me right. He had the same outfit because Dad was gone and I was the oldest boy. I had a brother about 8 years old. And I had all this farming to do, see. We had 250 acres of wheat out that year. And taking me away from that outfit, why, anybody with common sense would say he's more valuable down here at home getting that stuff done as he would over there in the service, see, and this land laying idle, see. So that was what happened. It was quite, it didn't take very long. There's not very many of them left stayed around there anymore after them boys come home.
How many were in the self-defense league?
Huh?
How many were in the self-defense league?
This bunch of farmers, people that was in the business that was English, see, they joined it, what they called themselves Council of Defense. And they set up the rules and regulations, what they done, how much you're going to pay and how much you had to donate to give to just free, just give it to them, see.
Besides that incident with the preacher, did anything else happen to you during the war?
No, they didn't anything else. I didn't have any trouble. But I was mad enough. That preacher, when he told me he'd kill my mother and put her in a box and send her to Germany, I just couldn't take that. I was just about 16, 17 years old. And I said, brother, when I meet you, the day I meet you, when I grow up. But I never did catch him. He left. When the bunch came back, he left, and I never did see him anymore. But that has been one thing what I had my mind made up that was what was going to happen, see. Because Mama couldn't help. She come over here from Germany, and she couldn't talk English very much. We always talked German at home.
At the time on the Chisholm Trail Monument, when you first started working on that, what was the main reason that you got involved in that? Could you tell me?
There's quite a story there. You see, they had this Cherokee Strip Cowpunchers Association. They had this organization, see. That was people that was in the strip before the strip opened, see, working here, and they organized, see. And they appointed two guys. They wanted a monument. And one of them was Ed Stinnett, and the other one was John Taylor. Not John, not Taylor, it wasn't Taylor either, John, why can't I think of his name now? Anyway, they appointed those two to go ahead and raise this monument. So Mr. Garber, M.C. Garber, I don't know whether you knew him or not.
Yes.
He gave them that corner of land up there to build a monument on it, see. So they went ahead and dug a place and made the foundation. They hauled, I don't know how many brick loads of cement to put down on that base. And then when they collected this money, why, what upset the apple cart, they went ahead and bought them an automobile, the money they collected, see? That made the public mad. And they wouldn't give them no more money, so the base was sitting there, and it sat there for years, see? You couldn't get nobody, wouldn't have nothing to do with it. So we got a roundup club started in here, and I got a good friend with Ed Stinnett. I knew him, and so Ed said to me, he said, Fred, he said, you know, we got in trouble, and we can't raise enough money to get this monument worked. And he said, I believe you can do that for us. He said, you're well enough known here. And he said, I think you can do that. He said, would you take it? Well, I said, I'll take it under one condition. I said, if you give me a clean bill of health. See, I knew they had trouble. Give me a clean bill of health where there wasn't anything against it. And he said, yeah, he said, I think we can do that. So they called a meeting. Ed Smith, an attorney, he was the attorney, he's dead now, he died. He was secretary and treasurer on that thing. So they had a meeting, and I went with the meeting, and I told them if they'd give me a clean bill of health that showed that there wasn't anything against it, see. Everything was clear, and I'd have full charge of putting it up the way they wanted it. Well, I had a meeting and said, well, we've made arrangement. We got see, they had wrote about every monument company in the United States about putting up this monument. Everybody wanted to put it up, see, put this monument up. So they had a girl draw the picture of the one that they wanted, you know. And so they got made postal cards, and they sold the postal cards for a nickel. Tried to raise enough money, try to get some money out of printing out. Well, anyway, when they gave me this bill of health up here, I took them hit. I told them if I take this thing, I got me a notary for a foreign notary, and I wrote down there that I'd collect this money, whatever I collected. I was going to write down, I've got it all down in a book, what each one paid. And I said, if I don't get enough collected to buy this monument, I said, I'll return every bit of it. I signed that before a notary, see.